Chirst Glad Prudele by Johann Sebastian Bach. This is the second of two works by J.S. Bach based on this chorale that we are going to examine. And it should be very easy for you to tell one apart from the other. For example, notice that this one is presented in quotation marks, whereas the title of the other one was not. That indicates that this one is a short composition and that it has only one movement or one section in it. Another way to tell these works apart is to take a look at their performing forces. As I already told you, you will be provided with the performing forces of each of these two compositions on the test, so this one for solo organ should be very easy to distinguish from the one that is written for choir, orchestra, and basso continuo. Also, you can use the very titles to tell one apart from the other. In terms of genre, this short one-movement work for solo organ is a chorale prelude. You already know that the word chorale means hymn. Now let's take a look at what the word prelude means. It comes from the Latin word preludium. Pre or pre in English means the same thing. It means before. And the second part of the word comes from the verb to play. So it means something that is played before something else. The word prelude is used a lot outside music, but that is where it originated. Such compositions, chorale preludes, were played before a hymn was sung by the congregation, and they served as an introduction to it. These days, church musicians generally just play a stanza of the hymn straight through, but in the old days, much more was expected of church organists and church musicians than today. In fact, this was such a normal part of an organist's duties that such works usually were improvised. Very few people bothered to write down such compositions in the past, and even today, extremely skilled organists will make these up on the spot and not record them for posterity. As you can imagine, Johann Sebastian Bach, one of the greatest organists in history, had no need to write down such compositions for his own use. He did, however, as we've seen before, have a strong desire to instruct others in the art in which he had attained such mastery. And the composition that we're going to hear comes from a collection of 160-some compositions of this type that he calls his Little Organ Book. The title certainly is modest. Bach's names for these compositions, however, are absolutely precise. Whenever Bach referred to such compositions that he presented to the world, he referred to them as exercises. In fact, his Little Organ Book is part of his Klavierübungen, which in German means keyboard exercises. And another portion of his Klavierübungen contains his preludes and fugues for the keyboard. As we already know, Johann Sebastian Bach was not famous as a composer during his lifetime. His musical style was hopelessly out of step with the times, and so when he presented his works to the world, he had to describe them as such, mere exercises. This particular chorale prelude of Bach's is typical of many such works of that type by the composer. It is a cantus firmus setting of the chorale melody. You are already experts on cantus firmus settings. Here the cantus firmus is presented in the soprano, and it is presented in long, slow notes, and it's set against the counterpoints in the other voices, which are written in shorter, faster notes. Such an introduction to a hymn might have helped the congregation to recall the composition that they might not have sung for a year or so. Before you hear the work itself, I'd like to prepare you to hear this composition and to prepare you for the character of this composition. Of course, this is an Easter song, but in fact, it does not deal specifically with the typical Easter narrative. When we think of Easter, we normally focus on the resurrection. This composition, however, with its somewhat grim-sounding title, Christ Lay in Death's Bonds, that came from another composition, Victimae Paschali Laudes, Hail the Paschal Victim, refer not to the resurrection, but to what preceded the resurrection. In fact, this paraphrase of the medieval sequence for Easter contains not only musical paraphrases of the medieval melody, but also paraphrases of the medieval text as well. Take a second to look at the stanza, or take a look at the text at the beginning of stanza 4. Stanza 4 begins thus in German: Es war ein wunderlicher Krieg, da Tod und Leben rungen. This is almost an exact German translation of the Latin Mors et vita duello confligere mirando. By the way, all well-educated musicians should have at least the first two stanzas of that sequence, that very famous sequence, memorized. The text of both of these songs, the chorale and the pre-existing medieval sequence for Easter, both refer to a struggle between life and death. And that is exactly what the deeper theological meaning of Easter is all about. It is the culmination of a battle between life and death. Christians believe that Christ's triumph over the grave has opened the path to eternal life for them. Bach, when he was setting these words to music, was well aware of the mystery that he was addressing, and therefore the music for this occasion has a certain gravity to it that you will not hear in modern Easter music, because today we tend to focus more on the narrative than on the deeper underlying meaning of these narratives. By the way, this notion of a battle between life and death must have been perfectly understood by churchgoers of past centuries, because there exists from the 16th, 17th, and 18th century a number of compositions for the organ that are simply called battle. These battle pieces, I used to wonder why on earth they existed, and then I realized that they were played at Easter church services in the place of the sequence. And they were there to symbolize the culmination of the battle between life and death. Okay, I'll let you out of church. Listen to this composition as a purely musical composition, that is, as a cantus firmus setting, with the existing melody, the cantus firmus, set in long, slow notes against the shorter, fasting, moving notes of the other voices. And notice the gravity of this composition. It doesn't sound like any bit of Easter music that you've probably heard in your own church-going experience.